This is CBS Eye on the World. I welcome Victor Davis Hanson of the Hoover Institution, writing most recently in American Greatness. I am John Batchelor, and I am following Victor's identification of cultural collapse these last years, perhaps purposeful, perhaps a remnant of chaos. In any event, there are six items for us to address, so I'll get right to it. Victor, a very good evening to you. It's alarming to read that the
Uh,
dollar is in trouble, that the credit of the United States is unworthy. The question is this purposeful on the part of those in authority in Washington and across the culture? Do they want to undermine our confidence in our prosperity? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. I don't have the answer to that because so many things are inexplicable. The border is wide open. All of our cultural reference, William Penn to Shakespeare to Cervantes or statues or references have been changed or taken down. And we have three genders instead of two. So it's a cultural revolution, but I don't see the tangible results yet because it's superimposed on a border that doesn't exist, a budget that's 2 trillion in deficit, 35 trillion national debt we're heading toward, foreign policies, disasters like Afghanistan, crime is rising, the whole idea of jurisprudence is under attack. So we're in a revolutionary time, but I think everybody's worried because there's nothing, the center's not holding. There's nothing, there's no referent that they've grown up with or that they've known that's not under attack by this Jacobin movement.
Let's go to security, the second item you say that is much in question. The example right now is in the Red Sea, where the Houthis, or a mountain gathering gangs that are armed with drones and missiles supplied by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, they are bedeviling worldwide container and oil traffic through the Red Sea. The US and the UK are firing back, but in any event, the Houthis are not intimidated. In, and the result of this is that the marshal on the beat is seen to be bootless. Is that a result of a cultural collapse as well? Is that purposeful?
I don't know. I think the Houthis are part of a larger paradigm where this administration tries to continue the Obama vision of a Shiite crescent, um, the axis being Tehran, Damascus, Beirut, Gaza, that would offer creative tension maybe in the Middle East, and then Israel and the moderate Arab regimes would be balanced against this new power bloc, and then we would be the adjudicator. That was the Obama dream, and part of that was to remove terrorist affiliate to remove terrorists like the Houthis and Hamas from terrorist labels and not to label them terrorist organizations anymore, and to give money to people like Hamas and to try to restart the Iran deal and not to reply in a deterrent fashion for these provocations that we're seeing in the Red Sea and then Syria and Iraq against our installations. But it's part of a larger agenda that they feel that domestic politics are changing within the United States. There's a lot more support for the Palestinians, less so for Israel, and they want to get ahead of the curve, so to speak, I think, in foreign policy.
Is this an anti-war faction all dressed up into modern terminology, condemning this and condemning that? Is that what we're dealing with? Peaceniks or something more than that?
I think it's more than that. I mean, the same people who are demonstrating want to give as many weapons as they can to Ukraine. So I think it's more of a revolutionary fervor where the cultural Marxist binary that they've established within the United States of oppressed, oppressors, victimizers, with nobody in between, and all arbitrary by fiat, these labels, they apply to foreign policy. So there's a group of people who are Western, or they're considered European, or they're considered colonists or settlers, arbitrarily so, and they're the bad guys. And then we are going to support national liberation movements, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or by de facto Iran. And I think that's part of it. It's the absorption of domestic politics into foreign policy, or superimposition of it into foreign policy.
We puzzle, though, because security is not only a matter of our shores, but it's our allies' shores as well. And the puzzle then is, are we something to be relied upon. Once upon a time, if you called up for the marshal, he would show up on the beat. Is that now uh, an opinion of our allies, and our enemies will show up, or is there doubt?
Well, they're very careful not to criticize us publicly, but when you talk to them or email them or they express or you interview with them, they were very worried because they thought that Joe Biden would be a deterrent president and supposedly remedy the chaos of Donald Trump. But privately, they all said that Donald Trump was a deterrent president, that there was no invasion of Ukraine during his tenure, there was no Hamas invasion of Israel, there was no terrorist activity in the Red Sea. There was no Chinese balloon. There was no withdrawal and humiliation in Afghanistan. So they're kind of troubled. And when they talk, they want to know what the United States is going to do. And they will not act unless the United States is lead. When I say they, I'm speaking of the Europeans and the Japanese and the South Koreans and the Taiwanese and the Australians. And they look at China and Russia and this new Iranian bloc that's forming with appendages like Turkey, even in North Korea. And they say, my God, we have to make decisions. This is our neighborhood. You guys are way over there with two oceans. But if you're not going to help us, you're not going to protect us from this new rising ascendance of these illiberal regimes, what are we going to do? We have to make either a deal with them or we're out on our own. What's the deal? Where's the America that we used to rely on?
Coming home, the distinguished essayist Lance Morrow has a piece in the Wall Street Journal within these hours I recommend. And he talks about Harvard because he's Harvard 63. He talks about Ralph Waldo Emerson and the world of the 19th century, letters and a recommendation of America. But then he comes to this concept on race, or what's happened to race in these last years of progressive language. He writes at the close, in the big realm of ideas and art, Emerson's whiteness was no more disqualifying, let alone oppressive or evil, than William Shakespeare's. To say otherwise is to embrace an ignorant, inverted racism that has no place at any university. Speaking of Harvard, but I could extend that to other campuses. We've talked about Stanford. I could talk about Princeton. What's happened, Victor? How is it that this observation, commonsensical by Mr. Morrow, is seen as confrontational or somehow out of the flow?
Yeah, I think for too long the DEI woke movement was allowed to create the very stereotypes they said was injurious to their own histories, and that was this idea of white. And white is a very nebulous term. I mean, I live in a community, John, of 95% Hispanics, either from Central America, but mostly from Mexico. And on the census, 25% of them identify as white. It'd be impossible to tell they were not Italian or Greek if you met them. And so it's a very fuzzy term. But what's happened with the DEI and this cultural binary that I mentioned, all people who are white, and that can be anybody from Greek to Arab to, I don't know, any European, doesn't matter. They're just arbitrarily labeled white and then therefore culpable. And then the non-white, and that would be Latinos or Blacks or Asians, along with women and gays to some extent, then they have intrinsic faults or culpabilities that they attribute to white people. And then there's a repertory mindset that you owe us certain things for the things that have happened in history. And when they can't find racism or bias, they use these adjectives, John, microaggressions, because they can't see an aggression. So it's micro. Or when they say there's racism, you don't understand. It's systemic. It's like the air. You can't really identify it, but it's everywhere. And it takes DEI experts in the thousands to monitor these microaggressions and systemic racism, trigger warnings, things like that. And they're so self-absorbed that they don't realize that they are acting in a racist fashion, and they're lumping 270 million plus people together of very different ethnicities, classes, religions, politics, ideology, and always in a disparaging fashion. I think it's creating a lot of anger, and I don't think it's going to stand. I think people are going to say, you know what? If you're going to stereotype me like this, then I'm going to answer back to you. And that's happening.
I'm speaking with Victor Davis Hanson of the Hoover Institution, writing on American Greatness about cultural values plunging or being broken. When we come back, lawlessness. Victor, I read recently, to my surprise, that carjackings are now a curse of the nation's capital, in and around the Capitol building, the White House, Center City. There's other examples of lawlessness, uh, DAs not prosecuting such and such a crime, or people walking out the afternoon after they've harassed civilians, pedestrians on the street. Is this a product of a failed justice system? Is this again purposeful? Because it can look like poverty, or it can look like the pandemic. What is it?
It's purposeful, and it took ascendance. It was there before, but it really took ascendance after the George Floyd riots and that period and the COVID lockdown. And basically, it's the detailed manifestation of this critical theory school that all rules, laws, values are constructs of a ruling class. So when applied to critical race theory or critical legal theory, in this case, legal theory, it says, well, carjacking and looting and shoplifting, there's laws against that because wealthy white male heterosexual people don't do it very often. So then they arbitrarily call it a crime. And so therefore, we want the security guards not to prosecute or even stop shoplifters. We want everything behind cages. And, carjacking it's something that's a cry of the heart of the oppressed. So how that translates is a loss of deterrence because criminals see that if you carjack, you smash and grab, you hit somebody, there's a 50-50 chance that you are going to have no cash bail and you're going to be out the same day and you can have a series of felonies. And this was what it was like. It wasn't as deliberate, but ad hoc in the 1960s and 70s that gave us Rudy Giuliani and the broken windows philosophy. And here in California, 3 strikes and you're out. And I think we're going to have a return to that to create stability from chaos.
Education. Now, this is something you and I have spoken of much over these last months because of the questions raised about the misconduct of some parts of the college campuses, especially elite college campuses. MIT, the MIT, University of Pennsylvania, and Harvard, much in the news, but it extends to other campuses, not exclusively there. Again, I puzzle about the drop of standards. Now, some have explained it to me is because the universities these last decades have only hired people of one political ideology, or if they're not of that ideology, they obey it or oblige it and don't dissent. Is that the driver of the educational collapse, of the culture being rocked so that you don't trust college anymore? And in fact, there's new talk that bypass college. It'll only cost you a lot of money and upset you.
Yeah, I think in the abstract, the idea was the 60s idea came to full fruition that everything is biased, the corporation, the family, the religion, the community against progressivism, and therefore they could create these atolls where they could be blatantly left-wing, hardcore progressive, 95% if you gauge faculty by their donations or party affiliations at many elite schools. And that was okay. And then I think that 60s idea then manifested itself with the DEI woke movement that you have to change the admissions, the hiring, the tenure to bring people in on basis other than, in the case of admissions, comparative ranking of GPAs or SAT scores. And therefore, when you brought a lot of non-traditional students in, of course, we're forgetting class. A lot of the non-traditional students were as wealthy or wealthier than the per capita income among the majority population. And new faculty, then you had to change standards because standards, as we saw with jurisprudence, are arbitrary. So in the case of Claudine Gay, the Harvard president, it wasn't 2 books as usual for tenure at Stanford for a political science professor. It was just 4 articles. There was no inquiry whether they were plagiarized or anything, and we go on and on through that trajectory to where she ended up, and then to even suggest that she had been the beneficiary of undue preference based on race and gender was itself racist. And so here's where we are. And I think the problem is that the reason the United States works, John, is that people come over here based on a meritocratic, equal opportunity climate, not a quality of result, not a quality of outcome, not a racially gerrymandered system of admissions and hiring. And it affects the entire society when you put people in there for criteria, in there meaning a job or a slot in the university for reasons other than demonstrable meritocratic accomplishment.
And then we come to sovereignty. And this is the puzzler of puzzlers. We can see the videos from the border. I've done a great deal of reporting about the Darien Gap is between Colombia and Panama. Tens of thousands. In 2023, the least estimate the Panamanian authorities have come up with is 250,000 people through the Darien Gap directly to the United States. Thousands, tens of thousands of Chinese nationals flying to Ecuador, taking the bus north, crossing the Darien Gap and coming to America. You have declared very carefully over many weeks there is no border. Is there a point to this? Who is in charge of this? What is the
Yeah.
ambition?
It's deliberate because there was almost, by the end of the Trump administration, there was almost no illegal immigration. They had stopped catch and release. They hadn't made refugees apply for such status from their home countries. The wall was being repaired and expanded. There were deportations. So this is deliberate. And people all around the world have gotten the message that this administration wants you to come. And it wants you to come because if you're poor or you're a member of a marginalized community, if you're Asian or you're Latino or you're Black, you have grievances against the majority population and you are a new constituency. And this is partly in fear that the agenda that this administration is promoting has no popular support. And especially there's large scale defections among the Latino community, to take one example, and they feel that new constituents, 8 million, 10 million, will help the Democratic Party. Let's be honest. Now, what I just said, they will suggest as racist. They call it the great replacement theory. But all I'm doing in describing this, John, is reflecting their literature, books with the titles of The New Democratic Majority or Demography is Destiny. All of these essays and books that they have been writing for years in triumphalist fashion say we're going to have a new constituency that will give us a permanent, progressive, big government, high tax, lot of entitlements agenda. And I think that's what's behind it. And people are reacting worldwide to that signal.
Victor Davis Hanson of the Hoover Institution. I'm John Batchelor.